All right. I want to start by telling you guys a story this morning. The story is about there was a boy named Bob. And Bob really loved numbers. And because he loved numbers so much, he decided he was going to be really good in school. And he went all through school, and he did excellent as he was going through school in all of his math classes. Everything was good, and he went all the way through high school, did very well, and then he went to college and did very well in college, and he graduated from college, and he became a certified public accountant. And he had his job working as a CPA, and he went every single day to work and crunch numbers and got to enjoy what he was doing. And then he got married to another CPA, and they both loved crunching numbers, and they just had this wonderful dull life of crunching numbers. And then they had their 2.5 kids and their dog and their white picket fence, and then they lived happily ever after. And that's the end of the story. Not a very good story, was it? Well, I'm a fan of a good story. That was not an example of that, okay? Whether it's classic literature or a bedtime story or a ghost story. I remember as a child camping or at lock-ins with the youth group that sometimes someone would take the flashlight and stick it under their chin like this and sit there and tell a ghost story. My mom was great at telling ghost stories. I remember as a kid she would tell us a ghost story about this man with a hook scratching. His hand was a hook, and it would scratch at the car, and somebody was telling this ghost story, and then all of a sudden he would get out of the car and there would be a hook hanging on the door of the car. Mom would tell these ghost stories, and my brothers and I were just listening. And I remember there was times where she would tell the story and she would coordinate with my dad ahead of time, and she'd be telling us a really good story and we'd be right in the middle of it. And then all of a sudden Dad would go, "Ah!" in the middle of it, and then we, as kids, would scream and got our hearts pumping faster and scared us and felt really good. Whether it's a play by one of the historically great playwrights out there, a good comic strip, a cheesy TV show, or some great film. I love stories. Some of my favorite films are some of the old films starring Cary Grant. I loved Arsenic and Old Lace. I loved Father Goose. I loved Operation Petticoat. And then there was the great suspense mystery films out there by the incomparable Alfred Hitchcock. To this day, writers and screenwriters and playwrights are constantly talking about the storytelling that Alfred Hitchcock was able to do, and the way he was able to write a film that you didn't have to show the murder actually happened. You didn't have to show the blood, but you were terrified. To this day, I cannot watch the movie The Birds without sitting there going, it is amazing to me how they don't actually show anybody getting killed by these birds. But all of those birds are terrifying, to the point to where Becky and I will be driving down the road and we'll see a flock of birds. Like, there's been several times we've been coming to and from church and coming down from Early Mark to here to Alpa, in all of those groves along the side of the road. We were coming down a while back and there was thousands of birds sitting all in the top of these trees as we were coming through. It was just this huge flock that was there. And Becky and I both looked at each other and looked at the birds and said, it's the birds. Look at all of those birds. They're going to take over. In fact, if I remember correctly, we had our windows rolled down at the time in the car, and we both proceeded to roll our windows up. It's just a goofy thing like that. But a story will get into your head. A good story will hook you. Silly as it is, I'm a sucker for a silly comedy. One of my favorites is Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. It's stupid, but it makes me laugh. And it gets me following these characters. And even though I haven't seen the movie in a long time, I still remember lines from the movie. And I still, to this day, will every now and then go, I am Bill S. Preston Esquire, and I'm Ted Theodore Logan. Together we are wild stallions. And do the whole air guitar thing. And Becky laughs at me every time I do it because I'm a dork. And I get that. I'm also a reader. I read all sorts of things. From the complete works of William Shakespeare, my brother Toby gave me years ago as a present, gave me a really nice leather-bound copy of the complete works of William Shakespeare. Because I've always enjoyed reading his works. I read Keats and Shelley. But I also read the Harry Potter series. And I read Isaac Asimov, Robert Ludlum, Dan Brown. Read all these stories, and I also love comic books. But I also just love stories, because to the point to where Becky laughs at me and gets annoyed with me a lot of the time, because I will get so involved in the storylines of a TV show, and I don't get tired of that storyline until it's finished. Like currently, right now, I'm rewatching the entire run of the series Star Trek Voyager. And I started off at season 1, episode 1 a couple weeks ago, and now I'm like halfway through season 4, and she, as of a couple of days ago, said, I feel like I'm on the Starship Voyager. I feel like I'm surrounded by all of these people, because I've heard nothing but computer noises from the starship and all these characters for the last few days, because I've gotten so involved in them. I just enjoy the story. I get invested in a great story. And it doesn't matter whether it's a comedy, a mystery, an action, suspense, romance, horror, drama. I have always loved a good story. But when I was in high school, I got to appreciate the architecture of a good story when I was in theater. I learned what makes a good play. A storyline that we can get emotionally invested in. Turn with me, if you will, to Act 1, Scene 1 of the greatest story ever told, also known as the Bible. We're going to look at Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was empty and it had no form. Darkness covered the ocean, and God's Spirit was moving over the water. Wow. The Bible is a narrative. But even more precisely, we can say that the story of the Bible is a drama. And what a way to start. The books come together to tell God's true story and his plan to set the world right again. A drama is an activated story. The Bible was written so that we can enter into the story. We can follow along. It's an interactive story. It's something that applies to our lives. The Bible was written so that we can enter into its story. It's meant to be lived. All of us, without exception, we live our lives as a drama. Some of us have more comedy moments in our drama than others. But we all have drama in our lives. We are on stage every single day. William Shakespeare, as I said, I'm a fan of his, famously wrote, "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players in it." So, what will we say? What will we do? According to which story will we live? If we're not answering these questions with the biblical script, we will follow some other script. We can't avoid living by somebody's stage directions, even if they're merely our own. The drama begins in the first pages of the book of Genesis, with God already on the stage, and He is creating a world. He makes man and woman, Adam and Eve, and He places them in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. And God's intention is for humanity to be in a close, trusting relationship with Him and in harmony with the rest of creation that surrounds them. In a startling passage, the Bible tells us that human beings are created to bear God's image, created to share in the task of bringing God's wise and beneficial rule to the rest of the world. Male and female together, we are significant, decision-making, world-shaping beings. This is our job, our purpose as defined in the biblical story. Then, as Genesis unfolds, as with any great story, tension and conflict are introduced into the script when Adam and Eve decide to go their own way and they seek their own wisdom. They listen to the deceptive voices of God's enemy, Satan, and they doubt God's trustworthiness. And the disobedience of Adam and Eve, the introduction of sin into our world, is presented in the Bible as having devastating consequences. And what are those consequences? We all know it. The devastating consequences was that Adam and Eve, before sin was introduced into this world, Adam and Eve walked and had daily interaction with God to the point to where He would come into the garden and walk with them, to the point to where when they were introduced to sin, they knew that they were naked, and if God wasn't physically there, they wouldn't have had to felt the need to cover themselves in their nakedness. They were able to physically be with God. Wow. And all of a sudden, because of the introduction of sin, God can't tolerate sin. He can't even look at sin. So the consequences were that He had to separate Himself from the sin. He can't look at it. So we, in our choosing sin, chose not to have that relationship with God. That's mind-boggling to me. What a devastation. Humans were created for healthy, life-giving relationship with God, with each other, and with the rest of creation. But now humanity must live with the fracturing of all of these relationships and with the resulting shame, brokenness, pain, loneliness, and death that was associated with sin. We see the direction of God's redemptive plan here as he calls Abraham, promising to make him into a great nation. God narrowed his focus and his concentration on one group of people, the Israelites. But the ultimate goal remains the same, to bless all the peoples on earth and remove the curse of sin from creation. A quote for you: "He is the God made manifest, the universal Savior of humankind." Pretty powerful statement. I'm going to blow you away, though. That statement, that quote, these words were referring to Caesar Augustus. That was a quote found in a Roman inscription from 4 BC in Ephesus. So just before Jesus comes onto the stage, we see these quotes being made about Caesar Augustus with the Roman Empire, the great and mighty Roman Empire that almost took over the world, proclaiming the gospel of the Roman Empire. This version of the good news announced that Caesar is the Lord who brings peace and prosperity to the world. But into this empire, a descendant of David was born. And he announced the gospel of God's kingdom. Jesus of Nazareth brings us the good news of the coming of God's reign. He begins to show the world what God's new creation looks like. He announces the end of Israel's exile and the forgiveness of sins. He heals the sick. He raises the dead. He overcomes the dark spiritual powers of demons. He renews the nation, rebuilding the 12 tribes of Israel around himself in a symbolic way. Jesus was the fulfillment of Israel's story. And he's a new start for the entire human race. Death came through the first man, Adam. The resurrection of the dead comes through the new man, Jesus. God's original intention was being reclaimed. God wants the victory of Jesus to spread through all the nations of the world. The risen Jesus said to his disciples, "Peace be with you. As the Father sent me, I am sending you." According to the New Testament, all those who belong to Israel's Messiah are children of Abraham, heirs of both the ancient promises and the ancient mission. The task of bringing blessing to the peoples of the world has been given yet again to Abraham's family. If we are followers of the Messiah, we are Abraham's children. So God's promise yet again, coming around because God always fulfills his word, his promise of making Abraham a great nation is complete again. Forgiveness of sins and reconciliation with God can now be announced to all. Not just the Israelites, to all the world. Following in the steps of Jesus, his followers proclaim this gospel in both word and deed. We are not just supposed to say these words. It's a life that we are supposed to live. A few years ago, Becky and I went to youth camp. And one of the girls from youth camp had seen us at church, had spent a little bit of time with us away from church, but just in small little hunks. And then all of a sudden, for the first time, Becky went with us to camp. And this little girl is spending a week with Becky. 24 hours a day she's with Becky. And we're halfway through the week, and this little girl turns to Becky and says, "I don't understand." She says, "What do you mean you don't understand? What don't you understand?" She says, "I don't understand how you're the same person that we see at church all the time." And she says, "What do you mean?" "Well, you're the same person. You haven't changed. You're the same person that we see at church." Becky said, "Well, that's because that's who I am. I don't put on a good face when I'm at church. I don't just live for God on Sunday mornings. I don't just live for God on Wednesday nights at youth group. I live for God every single day of my life, and I try and strive to live my life for Him and be me. The same me that proclaims Him Sunday morning is the same me that proclaims Him during the middle of the week when I'm sitting in the kitchen by myself at home, or when I'm at youth camp, or even when I'm having a frustrating time at home with problems. I still am trying to strive to be that same Becky every single day. That's how we're supposed to live our lives. If we claim to be followers of Jesus, we are supposed to live our lives in a way such that we are going to be the same person Sunday morning as we are Tuesday afternoon at work, or Saturday night when we're out with our friends. Should be the same person. We should strive to be the same follower of Jesus, the same example of God on those days when we're not at church. At the times that we are not expected to be on our best behavior, we should still be on our best behavior. Because that's part of being a disciple. It's part of walking a life for God. When we famously see the footprints in the sand pictures and poems where it's all about following the footprints of Jesus. That's the way we're supposed to live our lives. We're supposed to be following in Jesus' example of how to live. And if we claim to be a disciple of Jesus, if we claim to be a Christian, we are supposed to be following the example that He gave us of how to live. Not just Sunday morning, not just Wednesday evening, but every single breath that we take. The power of this new God-given life breaking into the world is meant to be shown in the real-world actions of the Christian community. The Bible is the story of the central struggle of life, weaving its way through the history of the world. And now the story arrives at our own time, enveloping us in its drama. God's saving action continues. We are all invited to take up our own roles in this ongoing story of redemption and new creation. God Himself is calling you to engage in its drama. So the challenge of a decision confronts us. What will we do? How will we fit into this story? What role will we play? God is inviting us to be a part of His mission of recreation, of bringing restoration, justice, and forgiveness. We are to join in the task of making things new, to be a living sign of what is to come when the drama is complete. as we close today, I want to share with you what I believe are 3 key steps to finding your place in this drama that we are living in. Number 1, the key is to immerse yourself in the Bible. The more you immerse yourself in the script of this drama, the better you'll be able to find your own place in the story. As I said, I did theater. One of my favorite exercises that we used to do was what we called improv times, where we would get up on stage and we would not have a clue what we were supposed to do. And literally the theater teacher would be sitting back down in the audience with the rest of the class, and there would be like 2 or 3 of us up on stage. And many of y'all may have seen the TV show Whose Line Is It Anyway? We did these improvisational activities. We would sit there, and on stage all of a sudden they would say, okay, your name is Bob and you are an architect. And you, Bob, architect, are meeting with Sally over here, who happens to have just lost her memory. Bob, you know Sally is your partner, and she is supposed to give you all of the architectural plans for this building that you're about to present your bid to build this building. Go. And that was all the instruction we got, and we had to make a scene out of it. I'll be honest with you, there was a lot of times, especially right as we started off doing these things, we'd be up on stage and it was a nightmare. We're up there trying to follow along, trying to make a story that made any kind of sense. Most of the time it didn't. And then there were other times that we would actually rehearse things. We would have a script. We would have a play that we were doing. And I remember as we started getting farther into rehearsals, we would always be able to know who had actually been studying their lines. And I am just as guilty as anybody else that was in our group that every now and then, because of football, because of life, because of just laziness, I didn't study my lines. And it would be time for me to get up there on stage and rehearse. And all of a sudden my brain would go completely blank and I would not have a clue what I was supposed to say, where I was supposed to walk, when I was supposed to come in. And I'd be on stage and I'd be in the middle of the scene, and all of a sudden I'd have to just kind of stop and line and wait for somebody to read off the line, or at least start the line to get me going. If we immerse ourselves in the script, we will be able to find our place in the story. Secondly, we need to commit to following Jesus. We need to turn from our wrongdoing, acknowledge that Jesus is the rightful ruler of the world, and commit to follow him and join with God's people. Too many people in this world say, I'm a Christian. But the only time that they ever do anything involving God is Sunday mornings for church. And even then, they're there just because that's what's expected of them or what has become habit, not because they're actually giving him anything of their life. They're giving him an hour of their time, but their heart's not in it. They're not ever picking up the Bible and studying. And if the world were to look at them next to Joe Blow, who has never been in a church in his life, they may not be able to tell the difference. Except Sunday morning when they're dressed in their church clothes and they're on their way to church and they're sitting there at service. Commit to following him, walking for him. Thirdly, live your part. Life's choices can be messy, but God has given us His Word, and He has promised us that His Spirit will guide us on the way. You are God's artwork, His masterpiece, the Scripture says. You have been created to do good works. May your life be a gift of beauty back to Him. A challenge for you today, because you know me, I'm all about challenges. Think about those steps. Examine in yourself. Have you been studying your script? Have you been actively following Jesus? Have you been living your part? Pray that God would expose in your life, if you are not studying your script carefully enough, if you are not living your part, if you are not following Jesus, that He would expose those things in you, help you to see where you are not measuring up, and show you how to fix it. Give your life to Him to say, you know what, I'm not just giving you my life on Sunday mornings, I'm not just giving you my life on Wednesdays, I'm giving you my life 24/7. Which step are you going to choose today? Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father God, we love you so much. We thank you for being the greatest playwright in history, the greatest storyteller ever to be. Lord, the best thing about your story is it's a true story. And it's a story that every single person on this world, from the start to the finish, can relate to. The reason why it's so relatable, Lord, is because you made every single one of us, and your word says you know us. You knew us before we were even put together in our mother's womb. Lord, you created us. You know us, and you have plans for us. Lord, help us to commit to following Jesus. Help us, Lord, to immerse ourselves in the script. Immerse ourselves in the Word so that we can follow your stage directions, so that we can be the best player for you that we can. Lord, help us to live our part. Help us, Lord, that when people see us, they see you. And Lord, anyone that we come across that is not living for you, help us, Lord, to have the words in playing our part, to be able to share your story, share the drama that unfolds, that is better than any drama on television, that is better than any major motion picture, any Broadway show. Help us to be able to share that drama with everyone that wants to hear, everyone that needs to hear. Lord, we just praise you. We thank you for the opportunity to call ourselves your children. Help us, Lord, not to take that part for granted. And help us to play it to the best of our ability. We just ask these things in Jesus' holy and precious name. Amen. God bless you. Thank you for coming.